Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the second episode of the Microsoft Entra Suite webinar series. My name is Amélie Darchicourt. I'm a senior PMM here at Microsoft, working for Microsoft Entra. And I'm very excited to share some awesome content again today with you. Let's jump right in. As a quick reminder, right, our webinar series here started last week with Irina Necheva, who shared an awesome overview of the Microsoft Entra Suite capabilities and also some pretty cool demos. So if you haven't seen this episode, I highly recommend going back and watching it. It's available on demand. And today, we're actually going to dive a little bit deeper in our very first key scenario for the Microsoft Entra Suite. So how to streamline the employee onboarding with the Microsoft Entra Suite. So this series also continues after this episode. We have 2 more webinars in March. So definitely mark your calendars and continue joining us for those. And obviously, as always, this presentation and demo is going to be followed by a Q&A with our product experts and our speakers. So you can already start posting all of your questions in the comments section of this page. All right, so let me start with a quick refresh about the Microsoft Entra Suite for any of you who are starting this series today. So the Microsoft Entra Suite is our comprehensive secure access solution for employees, which includes 5 deeply integrated products. So first, we have Private Access, which is our solution that allows to replace legacy VPNs and extend MFA and conditional access to any kind of resources. Then we have Internet Access, which is our identity-centric secure web gateway, and it protects against threats on the open internet. Then we have ID Governance, ensuring least privilege access to any kind of resource. ID Protection, which prevents identity compromises with real-time risk assessment for every sign-in request and every user. And then finally, we have Microsoft Entra Verified ID, which makes it possible to verify people's identities in real time in a completely privacy respecting way. So before we jump in with Steve, who is going to join me here today, I want to remind you about the key benefits of the Microsoft Entra Suite. So in this webinar series, we're really going to showcase all 4 of those. But first, with the suite, you have the ability to completely unify the access policy engine across identities, endpoints, and also networks. The second point is that the Entra Suite enforces least privilege access for all of your employees to any app or resources, even including AI models. The third is really about the user experience being so much easier for your employees to access any resource from anywhere. Doesn't matter where they're working from. And then the last but not the least is that the Entra Suite really reduces your on-prem security solution footprint. All right. So today we're actually going to focus on 2 of those key benefits, which is ensuring least privilege access and improving the user experience, specifically for one scenario, which is the user experience for the identity lifecycle management. And so our amazing Steve Kahn is going to walk you through this scenario. And so with that, over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Amelie. I think the best place to start is with this architectural view of all the products within the Entra Suite and how they map to your environments and your business processes. So the products included, as Amelie mentioned, in the Entra Suite help you address the key scenarios in the identity and access lifecycle. And that starts with onboarding new users, right? We've got this kind of continuous influx of new employees into any organization. Automating that really streamlines that process and helps prevent mistakes. Then governing access for those new employees and all the existing employees, making sure that they have the least privilege access to any app, any resource they're using, but that they also have all of those accesses so that they can maintain the highest productivity. And then securing all the access to those apps and to those resources with risk-based policies. Let's see how that works in practice. So we're going to focus on improving the access of onboarding employees with face check, with verified ID, and then also Entra ID governance. Now let's move along to the demo here. Now in this demo, we're going to follow Violet Martinez. She's an employee at Woodgrove, and she's just transferred from the marketing department to the finance department. In this new role, she's going to have access to sensitive data, so she'll be able to process those high-value transactions. And here is how that works. We're going to start in Violet's My Apps portal, where we can see all the Woodgrove resources that she has access to. And you can see she's still got access to her marketing applications here that she used as in her marketing role. But her first day in finance, she gets an email from her boss. So let's open up her email here. So welcoming her to the finance team. And she's going to need access to the finance applications. And this is going to kick off that workflow sequence that we talked about. So she's going to click on this link in order to access the finance applications. She lands in the My Access portal. And this is where ID governance, the entitlement management access packages are delivered and created. So she's going to need access to the business app. She doesn't currently have access. So she's going to need to present a verified ID. Let's go ahead and have her continue. She's presented with a QR code. And this is requiring or verifying her access, her identity, before she gets permissions to this access package. So she's going to go ahead and click this QR code. And here comes Violet's phone. Now, she's using Microsoft Authenticator as her digital wallet to store her digital credentials. So let's go ahead and click on Authenticator to open that up. She types in her passcode. And here is her verified employee ID, along with a few other digital credentials that she's gained over time. She's going to go into the QR code reader here, going to scan that QR code, and she's going to share the results of her face check with the organization. So she's got her digital credential that she's going to present. But there's an additional step here, and the organization wants to make sure that they verify her identity. So here's where she's going to take a selfie and share it. There we go. Verifying that this image matches against what is on record in her digital credential. Face check is matching. Now remember, we're not sharing the actual image there. We're sharing the comparison. What's on record and what was just taken. And as long as there's a match, then we'll share the result with the organization. The organization gets that credential. We're required to justify why we need access. So just put in our business justification here and submit the request. So here we see it's being processed. All right, so now Violet goes back over to My Apps, and you can see the marketing apps that she no longer needs have been removed, but she has access to all of these sensitive finance apps. She can get to work. She's ready to go. So this is the user experience. What does Violet see as an end user in gaining access and having the old accesses removed? Now let's go to the other side of the desk, if you will, and see what the admin experience is. All right, so as promised, we're going to go behind the scenes and see what the administrator experience is like to set all this up, the demos that we saw from Violet's standpoint from the user side. So we're going to go to identity governance here, and lifecycle workflows as part of Entra Identity Governance makes it easy to manage these joiner, mover, leaver processes. To go into lifecycle workflows, and if I click on the workflows here, it'll load up the workflows my organization has. Now you can see we've got one set up for just Violet's situation, somebody moving from the marketing organization to the finance organization. Now we've got a connector to the organization's HR system. So when the HR department moves Violet in their system, Entra ID Governance listens to that, recognizes that a change has occurred that meets the conditions here. It's inside that scope we talked about earlier. Condition being that the department changes from marketing to finance and now can fire off this workflow automatically. Now, when that condition occurs, what are the tasks that should be accomplished here? So, for example, the first task, send an email to the manager. This could be the old manager and new manager, both. The second thing, remove the user from the selected groups. Maybe take them out of the marketing group that has access to the marketing apps, put them in new ones, etc. So if we click on that, remove the user from the selected groups, we want to remove the user from the marketing group. And then we want to request a new access package to be assigned to the user. We want to make sure that they get the finance package. Now, that set of application accesses, that access package, is set up here in entitlement management. If we click on access packages, we can see how these are constructed. And we've created an access package for the finance team. Now, they're probably going to have access to email, web browser, maybe the HR system, etc. But there are also specific apps that are sensitive financial data that should only be available to the finance team. That's what this package of applications is. If we take a look at the policies here for these apps, it says that anybody who moves to the finance department, if they're moving to the finance department, then we need to provide them access to the finance department apps. But we require a face check as part of that identity validation. And you remember that Violet had to provide the results of her face check for real-time identity verification. Here's where we've configured that. Now, we have to have an issuer of this verified ID policy. I click the issuer here and set a list from the Entra Verified ID network. And this is a third party that's going to intercede in between the user and the organization to verify the identities. I'm going to say this is Woodgrove as our verifier, and what type we want to make sure that the employee is a verified employee of the organization. Now we'll add that verifier. We'll say that we're requiring face check. Again, this is what Violet had to do, if you remember, to get access to these applications. Set up that we want a photo. Click next here. And we can set that these access packages expire hours, days, etc. We do recommend a recurrence here, that it's not just forever, that you do review these accesses on some recurring occasion. If you have any custom extensions, this is where we could call out to another application, a service application, for example, if we needed to send a laptop to somebody or configure them with a particular piece of hardware, we could do it here. So then when I click update, that will finish this edit of this policy. The workflow will happen automatically, moving the user from the marketing group to the finance group, removing them from the application access they had before, granting them new access, but requiring that they provide a real-time selfie photo in their verified ID with a face check to make sure that their information matches, and then they will get access to all those finance apps. So that's a look behind the scenes at the admin portion of this experience. Okay, now once the user is provisioned in the HR system, that user account can be managed by lifecycle workflows. And this is that identity lifecycle process that every employee identity goes through. The initial onboarding, we showed how that worked. When the employee comes into scope of the organization, they need access to certain things, but only that particular access to the right applications at the right time. The mover scenario. This is when somebody goes from department to department, like Violet did in our demo. Or maybe they move geographies and there are different apps and resources available depending on which geography you move in. Maybe that person goes from an individual contributor to a manager and they need access to some additional sensitive HR-related applications. Finally, the employee leaves the organization. Maybe they join another organization, they retire, they start their own company, what have you. We have to make sure that all of the access that that person has over time is gracefully removed, but that we maintain logs and records of all the access and when they were removed. From a fiscal perspective, it also helps us recover any licenses that may be allocated to that identity so they can be recycled and reused. Now, these workflows contain specific processes, and they're going to run automatically on those user identities as the user moves through the life cycle. Those processes are made up of tasks and execution conditions. Now, a task is a specific action that runs when that condition is met. Add this person to a team. Give them access to a SharePoint site. Remove access that they may have had from an app. Things like that. The execution condition configures the scope, the who, if you will, and the trigger. So if this, then that kind of scenario. Now, the next piece of this puzzle is face check with Entra Verified ID. Verified ID is a managed verifiable credential. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as a decentralized identity. It's a service that issues and verifies credentials to trustworthy, secure, and efficient digital transactions. Now, this is something owned by the user rather than the organization, so it's self-owned. It's typically contained in the digital wallet, and it is based on open standards, so it can be transported from place to place, but it can also be customized to make it specific for your organization's needs. Building on top of that Verified ID application is Face Check, and this is a premium capability. It's powered by Azure AI, and it adds an additional layer of trust by matching the user's real-time selfie against the photo on their Verified ID, which is usually a trusted source. That could be a passport or a driver's license, or in some organizations, some countries, it's a digital citizenship credential. Now, only the match results are shared, not the actual facial identity itself. So Face Check strengthens the organization's security and identity verification, but in a way that protects the user's privacy. It can detect and reject various types of spoofing techniques, things like deepfakes, for example, to fully protect your users' identities. Now, there's some great use cases for Face Check and for Verified ID. And some of those are that fast remote onboarding. And again, we saw a demo of this. Users do that credential validation that may be required during onboarding to make sure that the Violet Martinez that we're onboarding is actually the Violet Martinez we think that she is. And again, it's in real time and it's self-service, so it can be automated. The next use case is secure access. Verified ID can be used to verify or validate that the users met the requirements for sensitive access and get the necessary permissions faster and greater confidence. So requirements, what might that mean? Maybe it's training or certification, right? In order for Violet to access the sensitive financial data, she has to have gone through a training course and gotten a digital credential that validates that she's gone through this training. That's an example of that, getting the permissions by meeting the requirements. Maybe it's a professional certification, like a continuing medical education certificate that healthcare provider could take from place to place and show different organizations, yes, I'm current on my CMEs. It can also be used for very easy automated account recovery. And this is where the user can regain access to an account that may be locked by verifying their identity through self-service tools. They don't have to call help desk. in order to get reauthorized. And as we know, when help desk picks up a phone call, there is a cost associated, whether that's an internal support team or you outsource that. So by making that a self-service recovery process, not only is it quicker and more productive for the user, but the organization can move away from those costs. So to recap what we've done over the last several minutes here, we showed you how to streamline employee onboarding with the Microsoft Entra Suite. In particular, we showed you how to automate the processes depending on an employee's stage, whether that's joiner, mover, or leaver, by using lifecycle workflows. We showed you how to manage access requests and workflows and assignments and reviews and even the expiration of access with entitlement management. And finally, we showed you how to verify identity in real time with face check for verified ID. Now, with these steps and the Microsoft Entra Suite of products, you can ensure faster and more secure access from day one throughout an employee's tenure. That way, your employees stay productive, they get the access they need at the time they need it, while your organization remains safe, because as the employees move through this life cycle, any unneeded access permissions are removed. So, Amelie, that's the end of this section on streamlining employee onboarding and securing access. I'll pass it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. That was fantastic. So we're going to switch very quickly to a Q&A session and answer all of your questions very shortly. But if you already want to have a little bit more information about the Microsoft Entra Suite, I highly recommend for you to explore our Microsoft Learn resources. You have the link right here. You can also get started with a free trial of the suite right away. And obviously, the tech community is the place to go if you want to find the latest product announcements and all our news around Microsoft Entra. And of course, don't forget, the Entra Suite series continues. So in our next episodes, we'll focus on how to modernize the remote access to your on-prem applications and also how to retire traditional VPNs. And now our colleagues Martin Kotzer and Mary Lee Turskek are going to join us for a live Q&A. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Emily here. Thank you for joining. Steve is also with us, and I have the pleasure to have Martin and Jorge with us to complete this panel of experts. So before we jump into all of the questions, Martin, Jorge, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yes, thank you, Emily. My name is Martin Kutzer, and I'm in the Microsoft Entra team, and I focus on getting customers ready to deploy Entra Suite.
Hello, everybody, and my name is Jorge Lopez. I'm a senior product manager in the customer experience team, and we actually work with customers to help them deploy the Entra Suite as well and take their feedback about, multiple products and features within the Entra Suite.
Wonderful. Awesome. So we do got a lot of really good questions. Not a surprise, this session was very, very focused on ID governance and also verified ID and face check. So a lot of the questions we got are on this topic. So Martin, Steve, Jorge, let's jump right in. I want to start with one question that is, I think, super interesting because I think we hear that one all the time. So I think, Martin, I will ask you this one. Does Microsoft Entra ID and Entra ID Governance only work for Microsoft apps?
Yes, so that's a really great question. So obviously, ID Governance needs to manage all the apps that you've configured inside of your Entra ID. So you're going to assign apps through access packages to different users. So you are managing and governing your users that accessing the apps that you are using. So it's your identity system. So it is going to configure the group membership, or it's going to configure the assignments of those users to those applications. And so obviously, this is the way that people will get into the system. They will get access to those applications. And then when they no longer need it through those lifecycle workflows that Steve has mentioned, then we remove their access. So you are managing the identities of your users over time and make sure that they have the necessary access. And where you use these artifacts that you manage, like if you use a specific group, or in conditional access, or you use this group for another permission in another system. Maybe this could be a Microsoft Exchange where people email. So it's got the net effect in those other areas as well. So basically, because you're managing identities, and everything that's using the identities will benefit from using that ID governance functionality.
So any kind of application can be managed.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, just to add on to Martin's great answer there. Yeah, we see obviously customers using Microsoft products with Microsoft apps like Entra ID Governance, but yeah, also third-party apps. Some of the most popular apps on the planet, things like Salesforce and SAP and such. It doesn't have to be created by Microsoft in order to have the identities governed by Microsoft. So yeah, it brought adoption across the ecosystem.
And I would also add a little bit on what Martin and Siemens are saying. Think about on-premises apps as well. And that's where it comes very handy with private access and some of the other components that we have in governance to control the access, just-in-time access and everything for those on-premises apps as well.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much. That's a very good point. Another question we have is more around licensing. So this one, I think, Steve, will be for you. In a multi-tenant organization, does each user whose identity is governed needs a Microsoft Entra ID Governance license in each tenant?
Oh, great question. And as you mentioned, Amelie, we've got a lot of customers with multiple tenants. In fact, Microsoft itself, we've got the Microsoft tenant that the four of us all work and operate in. There's also the LinkedIn tenant. There's the GitHub tenant, Activision Blizzard, etc. And the great answer is no, you don't need to license each one of those users in each one of those tenants. A single license grants the access or grants the ability for those identities to be governed across all of those tenants. So as long as the organization owns and operates 1, 2, 3, however many 50, 60 tenants, that single license grants the abilities across all of them.
So one license per human, but it works across any tenant.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. I want to switch to a few questions about face check. This one is always bringing a lot of, I think it's a fascinating product, fascinating capability, right? Always brings a lot of questions. So Jorge, a few questions here. In the demo, we show that face checks is working with Authenticator. Is it required? The question is like, does face check require Microsoft Authenticator?
Yeah, Emily, it's a very good question, and we get it all the time as well. And the answer is yes. So face check actually requires the Microsoft Authenticator app, but this is in order for us to prevent those injection attacks that could happen, right? So we need to protect and make sure that liveness of the selfie that we're taking actually comes from a trusted device. So we are requiring the Microsoft Authenticator app for that. If you have not looked into that yet, you probably have used your Microsoft Authenticator app already to do a multi-factor authentication. There's a tab right there that says Verify ID, where you can actually find your digital credentials, and then also enable face check as well for your tenants to actually try it on. It's very simple to use.
Yep. Actually, we just got also another question about face check. Maybe Jorge, you can take that one. I don't know. Can we pull in face check requests via APIs?
That's a good question. I don't think it's possible, Martin. Steve, I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I can add. So obviously, if somebody wants to use face check in their own application, if we think about the app that needs to, say, for example, verify that you are who you are because you're going to speak to help desk. It's possible for you to build your own web application with all the interfaces to start the process to do the face check for you. So you can use the face check APIs to customize a application directly for yourself. And the example that we use was using our own tools. So My Access, where you have to do scan the QR code, but you could definitely build your own apps to build some of those other mechanisms, like, for example, the training or help desk and so on. And if you go to our Learn page URL that we shared earlier, there's actually scenarios and links to GitHub that will get you started to build those types of apps. So that is definitely available.
Awesome. One last question, I think, on FaceCheck. What is the difference? And I think this one, we had it already last week or something similar, but what is the difference between being verified using FaceCheck versus an authentication method like MFA? Is it the same thing? Jorge, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we do get that question, and it's a very, I mean, I totally understand like why people, may ask that question. So I'm glad that we can clarify that. So multi-factor authentication, it's a strong authentication method, right? It blocks 99.9% of account compromise attacks. And we use this strong authentication to find the right credentials to access something like an application and control and do another layer of verification of that identity. Face check with Microsoft Entra Verified ID, the main point is verifying the identity of someone, let's say a digital transaction, right? Something in real time facial matching, which is a liveness check, or ensures the right person is using the right credential. So think about as a face check or a way to focus on verifying the identity with high assurance, whereas MFA is more like a security setting to require multiple verification methods, but doesn't necessarily confirms a user identity like face check. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they could go hand in hand. Is that right? Right.
They can go hand in hand. Yes.
FaceCheck is really like that extra layer of security when you need super high assurance that you have indeed the right person behind their device, right? So you're verifying the person and the credentials with MFA. Yep. Awesome. Steve, question for you. Can identity governance be extended to on-prem Active Directory to have insights to admin accounts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jorge alluded to that earlier at the very beginning of our Q&A session. Yeah, absolutely. As much momentum as there is for moving apps and services and things to the cloud, there's still, a good number of on-premises dependencies, apps that, it maybe doesn't make sense to move, or more to your question, the admin accounts that are, doing something in a privileged way on premises. And yes, absolutely, we continue to invest in helping our customers manage identities in the cloud, even if some of the actual work that needs to be done is on premises. Mm-hmm. So it is available today, and we're continuing to expand those scenarios to make the cloud the source of authority, and the on premises just kind of the results of those actions.
Yep. Awesome. Another question here, maybe Jorge, you can take that one. Is Microsoft Entra ID Governance only for large enterprise organizations or commercial organizations?
That's a great question. I can tell from our own experience that Microsoft Entra ID Governance is for any organizations who wants to govern their identities, right? Yeah. We've seen smaller organizations, we've seen large organizations that may be using it or start using it for a small subset of their divisions or all that stuff. So there's no requirements in terms of how large you have to be to govern your identity. So identity governance is definitely for any size of your organization and any different use cases that you may want to use in your organizations.
If I could follow on to Jorge, we've actually got specific versions of Entra ID Governance for government customers that have an extra layer of security and kind of data boundaries. We've got a special version for educational customers. And you might imagine that, as we talked earlier, that onboarding and offboarding of cohorts is a very important use case for a typical academic institution. It has a big tranche of students coming in and then students leaving. So yeah, certainly a number of different ways or areas that people have adopted Entra ID Governance. And in fact, Jorge, you can maybe add some color here. The reason that some of these smaller organizations have really dived into governing their identities for the first time is that Entra ID Governance is a much simpler way to deploy and get started. It doesn't require a team of developers, for example, to customize to move forward.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we see a lot of different use cases of these smaller organizations as well to deploy their own in-house PowerShell scripts or any other sort of Azure functions and all that stuff where Entra ID Governance, more like lifecycle workflows, can help on automating all of those different tasks in a simpler way. So that's, adding to what Steve's saying, it's definitely something that we see a lot, helping smaller organizations, medium organizations, even larger organizations to automate all of these different processes.
Yep. Awesome. So I think switching back to face check again, right? Like all of our questions are ID governance or face check. So going back to face check for a little bit, maybe Martin, you can answer this one. How is verified ID with face check privacy respecting? I think we mentioned that, right, in the slides. After I use face check, where does the facial biometric data go?
Okay, yeah, so another great question, and this is something that we get from a lot of customers all over the world that wants to know that we're not going to share their selfies or their photos with anybody out there in the world. So it's important to remember that, yes, we are capturing your photo when we have to do that scan. That information, that biometric data, is then sent to the verified ID system that is run by Microsoft. We in turn do an API call to the Azure AI services. So that is where it is compared, and your likeness is compared with the selfie that we captured, and then we do all of the processing, and we come up with what they call a confidence score, and that tells us, like, did the picture that we provided, so either the government ID or the picture in the Entra ID directory, did that correspond, or how does that compare with the specific user that did that scan? And then that result is then passed back to the system. So we don't store that photo anytime during this whole process. So it's never stored in any of the systems. And it's also, the photo is never given back to the system that is requesting this information. We only pass whether or not you, what's your confidence square, that you meet that criteria. That is the result that we sent back. So the photo is never stored, and we meet all the privacy requirements. And in fact, I'm going to also just share a link. If somebody wants to get into the detail, like, there is a lot of information that's going back and forth, and they want to make sure that we comply with their rules in their country. This is the place where you can go to go and check if this meets your either GDPR requirements and so on. So please check out that link, and it will help you to verify that. But in a nutshell, we never store that data, and we use it just to do that selfie comparison, and then eventually we just give the result back.
Yeah, no, that's a great resource. It's available at akms/facecheck data. So yeah, you can go there and check if it meets your criteria or compliance criteria. So yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Martin. That was a great answer. All right. Another question actually for face check. I think that's a really interesting one. Maybe Jorge, you can take that one. Does face check help combat deep fake, spoofing, and other forms of advanced impersonations?
Yes, great question. Because and Martin alluded to this one a little bit. So we use the Azure AI Vision Face API, which is basically configured and proven to be, preventing these spoofing attacks. Like we actually detect if somebody's trying to do like a 2D image instead of an actual live, selfie and pictures and all that stuff. So we use our Azure AI Vision Face API to prevent those spoofing attacks, and it's actually been proven to be very, very effective to prevent those.
Wonderful.
I want to add something as well, coming to the previous question as well, because it looks like face check is, getting a lot of attention.
It
here.
is,
So,
yeah.
The confidence score too is something that I get this question all the time. So I want to just address it since we're here. Can be configured as well. So we have a threshold that is, by default, but organizations can increase that. We of course have some recommendations on that link that Martin shared on, prevent false positives and all that stuff. So if it's something that you're interested in reading, or maybe adjust a little bit on the confidence score that we share with the service, is something that organizations can definitely do.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. It's completely customizable in a way, right? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I think we're reaching the end of our Q&A. I don't see any more questions coming in. I think last question will be probably for you, Steve, because it's related to ID governance. And so the question is Microsoft Entra ID Governance only for employee identities?
We just have a series of great questions here. So we've got a very sharp audience today. And the answer is no. Most organizations do start with their own employees, their workforce, because those are the people who are going to have the most requests for access, who need access to apps and data and teams and things to get their jobs done. But it does then quickly extend on to whether it's vendors, contractors, people who need access to specific things in your organization, but they're not your employees, they're not part of your workforce. And even extending out to partners that need to, maybe it's suppliers and things that need to collaborate with you. So yes, Entra ID Governance has use cases for all of those different kinds of scenarios. Starting with your workforce, because that's where most people start, and then expanding out. We certainly recommend governing any identity that's going to have access to any of your organization's resources.
Wonderful, thank you. And I actually talk a little bit too fast. We do have one more question, so I want to make sure we answer all of those. So the question is, on average, how many access packages does the average mid-sized company use? And can we tweak how those access packages are configured after they are assigned to users? Who wants to take this one? Martin, maybe?
Yeah, I can start, and we can, Jorge and Steve can also add if they want to. So on average, there's no such thing as an average company, as we all know. So you have to do what's right for your organization. But what we will say is, in the past, people use things like groups a lot to assign permissions to applications and to users to do certain things. And that has sort of created a legacy for a lot of organizations to think about applications and groups, and all of those things are the same thing. And people then tend to create an access package for every group that they created in the past. And this is actually a bad idea, because you are just perpetuating the many, many groups that you had in the past, and you now recreating that situation just in access packages. So our recommendation is to really think about how you can bundle those things together, because an access package doesn't just include groups, but you can add assignment of applications. You can do SharePoint sites. You can do team memberships. You can also do intra role assignments. And so if you bundle those things together in one access package, then you can do a lot more with one access package. So you flip this now to say, don't be so group centric and think about all the people that's supposed to be in that group, but now you become more like user-centric or role-centric and say, this is a role in my organization, and that role typically needs all of these applications, all of these groups, and you bundle all of them together, which means that you will likely end up with a lot less access packages that you have to manage. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to just make the problem bigger, and now you have to think about all these access packages that you have to manage and you have to keep up to date. And then in terms of assigning users and so on, yes, you can always add more users, add more packages that you will assign to your users after they've been assigned. So this is the beauty of the system. Obviously, you don't want to have a system that just doesn't keep up with your requirements of your organization. So you dynamically evolve this on both the user side and the applications as part of those entitlements.
I think that was a spot on. I don't think I can add anything more, Martin. So that was great. I would just say that to double down on what Martin is saying, having that categorization and the right approach when you create the catalogs, when you create the access packages, and move away a little bit of I'm going to create one access package for one application or one access package for a group, which is what we're trying to move away, right? Make this bundle and have that right strategy since the beginning, so you don't bring all of these quote unquote like legacy approach with just one group for one application and all of the different things. So think about more like application roles when we talk about access.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Martin, Jorge, and Steve. That was awesome. Do you have any final parting thoughts or advice for our audience today?
I definitely got one. If this is a kind of a brand new world for you, you're wanting to learn more, we've had a couple links to documentation, which is a great place to start. We've also got a free trial of all this functionality. You can set it up in a sandbox. You can set it up in your own environment if you want to, and just actually get hands-on with these applications and how they work together to secure your identities and let your employees, your people, be more productive because they get access to what they need at the right time. So we strongly encourage you, if you haven't seen it yet, look at the documentation and also set up a trial.
Yeah, you read my mind, Steve. I was going to say exactly the same thing. So if any of what we discussed today, you saw really spark your curiosity, you want to get started and try it, highly recommend the trial. So you can find it at AKMS/Entra Suite trial. I think it runs for 30 to 90 days, right? And there's a lot of documentation also on Learn to help you really get started with these scenarios. Again, right, let me share the link for Learn just in case. AKMS/Learn Entra Suite. Here you'll find a lot of articles about this scenario here on onboarding and users, but also a lot more. So I highly recommend going in there. All right, with that, thank you so much again. It was great to have you. We continue this series. So next Thursday, same time, we have another session on how to modernize remote access and replace legacy VPN with Microsoft Entra Suite. So another highly recommended session that will also be followed by a live Q&A with experts. So hoping to see all of you next week again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.